This is going to look at 19C, which is on time zones. And what I really want you to point out, time zones are determined mainly by meridians of longitude. So our lines of longitude decide our time zones. I said mostly though, and there are some exceptions so that certain countries exist in the same time zone. Now, this image is very blurry, but the vertical bands represent different time zones, and like they're in a light red, and so then when it's in a darker red, this section here in America and Canada are all in this same time zone. What I want to point out to you is like this over here. So we can see, if we look at Australia, we've got like most of us on the east coast on this red band, we've got this orange band, this green band, and if you follow this green band up, maybe you know that this country here is China. The map's a little off, but this is China. And you can see that all of China is existing in the same time zone, which is like Beijing time. But all the way out here, like these places would be better off being on this yellow time zone, but they're not. So that's like sort of problematic there because your work life and things might work on that actual time zone, but it still might be dark when you're having to think of it being as, say, 6 a.m., for example. For us to work with time zones, there's some calculations that we need to work off, and that is that for a time difference, 15 degrees of longitude is equal to 1 hour time difference, and so 1 degree of longitude equal to 4 minutes of time difference. If we think about this for a second, we know that a whole circle makes up 360 degrees. We know that there are 24 hours in a day. If you do 360 divided by 24, you get 15. So that's why 15 degrees is equal to 1 hour. And then if we think about that 1 hour, we know that in an hour there are 60 minutes. Okay. If you then do 60 divided by 15, you get 4 minutes. So that's why we then have this next calculation that says 1 degree is equal to 4 minutes in terms of time difference. Now, time is all set from GMT, which is our Greenwich Mean Time. So local times around the world are all given to Greenwich from the Greenwich Meridian. And remember, the Greenwich Meridian is our 0 degrees longitude that we were working with in 19B. Places east of that prime meridian are ahead of GMT, and places west of it are behind in time. So if we're thinking back to that circle where we were drawing, we're putting 0 degrees at the bottom, and then over here we've got our, I shouldn't draw that as a 0, but just as degrees east happening. Hold on, I need a pause. It's happening that way, and we've got degrees west happening out this way. Now what we're saying is, if it's noon at 0 degrees at our Greenwich Meridian, on the opposite side of the world, it's going to be midnight, okay? And as we go around east, we're going to get closer and closer and closer to midnight, but we're going to be later in the day. And so that means then that the further east we are, we're ahead in time, all right? And I guess if we go back to our map that we've got for a second, I just like to think of us, it's just focusing on just Australia. Hopefully you know that our time in Melbourne, where we're on the east coast of Australia, we are 2 hours ahead of Perth, which is on the west coast of Australia. So further east, we are 2 hours ahead. Further west, we are 2 hours behind. Another thing, I don't know if you've been to New Zealand before, but New Zealand's here, and they are 2 hours ahead of us in Melbourne. And Auckland is the first capital city in the world to celebrate New Year's when that happens, because they're the closest to that green international date line, which is our opposite 180 degrees. So this is New Zealand over here, which are really, really far ahead, okay? If we look at degrees west, that's going this way, and this takes us degrees west back in time, so we keep heading backwards to America, and I'll let you make whatever jokes you want to make about that for how you can remember that degrees west are back in time. So what we can do is we can use these formulas and locations to then find time differences between different places. If we're looking here, this question says Singapore is located at 1 degrees north, 104 degrees east, and Melbourne is at 38 degrees south and 145 degrees east. What is the time difference between Singapore and Melbourne? If we're talking about time difference, we can ignore the latitude, so the north and south stuff, and we just want to focus on the longitude, which is east and west. And if we thought about this for a second of where they're located, okay, this is my 0 degrees Greenwich meridian, alrighty. I've got 180 over here. This is 90 degrees east. 104 degrees east for Singapore. So Singapore is going to be chilling out here at 104 degrees east, okay? And Melbourne is up here at 145 degrees east. So straight away from those lines of longitude, Melbourne is more east, which means Melbourne is further ahead. So I don't know how far ahead, but I at least know to start with that Melbourne is more ahead. For me to know how much more ahead, I need to know what is this angle in here to get the difference between the two. And so for me to find that angle of difference, we're going to do 145 minus 104, and that gives us 41 degrees. And I now need to convert that 41 degrees into time. So remember we said before that 15 degrees equals 1 hour. So at the moment, if I did 41 divided by 15, I could pop that in my calculator, and I get 2.73 recurring. So Melbourne is at least 2 hours and a bit ahead, but I can't really say it's 0.73 recurring because when we talk about time, we talk about hours and minutes. So I need to convert that last part to minutes. And there's two ways that I could do this, okay? Option one, I could think about my multiples of 15. And so hopefully you agree with me that 30 degrees equals 2 hours. If I do 41 minus 30, I'm left with 11 degrees left over. And we said that like 1 degree is equal to 4 minutes. So if I do 11 times 4, that gives me 44 minutes. So I would say that Melbourne is 2 hours and 44 minutes ahead. The other way that I could do it is I can consider this part on the end, so the 0.73 recurring, that's a portion of an hour. And I know that 1 hour has 60 minutes. So if I go to my calculator and I could copy this number. I'm just going to change the 2 at the front to be a 0. And now if I do that times 60, we get 43.999 recurring. Okay, so we can say that that is 44 minutes. And so once again then, I'm going to say that Melbourne is 2 hours and 44 minutes ahead of Singapore. And you could choose there if you would use the method on the left or the method on the right. If I scroll down now, I'm comparing Melbourne and New York. It tells me Melbourne is at 38 degrees south, 145 degrees east, and New York is at 41 degrees north and 74 degrees west. Remember, I ignored these guys, and I just want to think about their lines of longitude on a map. So I've got 0 degrees here being my Greenwich meridian, okay? And I know that Melbourne is up here, up there at 145 degrees east. And I've got New York somewhere out here at 74 degrees west. Now, if we were wanting to find the distance between those two places, we would focus on the shortest part. But in terms of time, we actually need to know this whole big thing here, so this distance in here. Remember that this section here is 74 degrees, okay? But this whole bit around for Melbourne is 145 degrees. So for us to work with this so far, we've got to actually add 74 and 145 together, and that gets us a difference of 219 degrees. Now I've got to convert that to time. So if I do 219 divided by 50, that gives me 14.6 exactly. So it's saying it's 14.6 hours. But remember, this 0.6 on the end, I need to convert to minutes, okay? So to work out that last bit, I'm actually going to do 0.6 times 60, all right? And that gives me 36 minutes. So what we're saying then is Melbourne, remember it's going to be ahead because Melbourne is further east and Australia is ahead of America, is 14 hours and 36 minutes of New York, okay? Now, in reality with time zones, we might actually just give this as a set time of being 15 hours because like I showed you in that initial map, cities exist in certain bands, so that whole longitude, it'll still line up to a certain band. So we would say in reality that Melbourne is 15 hours ahead of New York. And part B wants me to think about then, if it's 8 a.m. in New York, 8 a.m. in Melbourne, what time is it in New York? Now, that means I have to go back 15 hours in time. So I've got 8 a.m. in Melbourne. If I go back 12 hours, that gets me to 8 p.m. in New York. And 12 and 15, I've got to go back another 3. So that gets me to 5 p.m. in New York, and it'll be the day before. And it's really important that I acknowledge it's the day before. If I did this for C, it's 11 a.m. in New York. What time is it in Melbourne? I've got to add on 15 hours because Melbourne is 15 hours ahead. So we've got 11 a.m. in New York. If I first of all add 12, I get to 11 p.m. and I've got to add on another 3. So that gets me to 2 a.m. the next day in Melbourne. The final question here, I'm racing the clock before the recording kicks off. Katie is in Dubai, which is 3 hours ahead of GMT. What is the approximate longitude of Dubai? So what we've got to do here, we want to think of those locations first. Remember, put 0 degrees here for GMT, okay? It's saying that it's ahead, which means we're talking degrees east, and we're coming 3 hours ahead. Now remember, 1 hour equals 15 degrees. So if we're 3 hours ahead, we're going to do 3 times 15, and 3 times 15 is 45 degrees. So what we're going to say is that the approximate longitude of Dubai is 45 degrees east. We need to put that east on the end because we've got to give that direction, and we know that the further east we go, the more ahead we get of the Greenwich Meridian. And if we wanted to, we could check on here longitude of Dubai, and it tells me it's 55 degrees east. So remember I said time zones put cities within a certain band together in that same time. So that 45 degrees east, that 55 would line up in that same time zone, making Dubai 3 hours ahead there. I hope that helps you to answer the things on time zones from 19C. Please let me know if you have any more questions on those. Thank you.